Well, good afternoon and welcome. We're excited. This is the first of a year-long series of seminars given by the Johns Hopkins Global Center on Childhood Obesity. And we've put together a really exciting group of speakers, some internal to the university and some outside. And we have the perfect person to start us off here in September. I encourage you to come to other seminars. The next one will be a very exciting speaker, Bruce Hansink, on 10/26. Brian Wansink, I said that wrong. Sorry if he's watching. That's going to be at 8 o'clock next Thursday in Somer Hall. This, as well as the other seminars in this series, are going to be webcast, and we particularly welcome those who are watching on the webcast and are delighted to make this an opportunity. Patty Mabry is a longtime friend of the Center on Global Center on Childhood Obesity. She has been there with us from the beginning. She is one of our key partners at NIH. She is the acting deputy director in the Office of Behavioral and Social Science Research at NIH in the Office of the Director, and she has very courageously made it her business to advocate and facilitate the development of system science at NIH. Now, this is not an easy job. It takes a lot of vision and a lot of courage and a lot of bravery. And Patty has been single-handedly making this a reality at NIH in a way that no one else has. Her interest in this topic is not merely conceptual. She has, in fact, issued several RFAs and program announcements for funding opportunities. She co-leads 2 computational modeling networks, which have really been doing very specific, concrete things to make advances in this field. She has been the guest editor of no fewer than 3 special issues of leading journals on the topic of system science. She's done a whole lot of stuff in her work. She's worked in the area of tobacco control, but this idea of building the capacity and the research infrastructure in system science at NIH has been one of her consuming passions, and she's done that beautifully. She was awarded the Applied Systems Thinking Prize in 2008 from the Applied Systems Thinking Institute and received the NIH Director's Award for her contributions to the NCORE modeling network from the Office of the NIH Director in 2012. She got her Ph.D. in clinical psychology from University of Virginia in 1996 and has been a visionary leader in this field and is a perfect person to kick us off in the seminar series. So please help me welcome Dr. Patty Mabry.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's my delight to be here. In fact, I think that was probably the best introduction, the most complimentary one I've ever gotten. So thanks for that, Tom. And to be the first one, I guess I'm going to have to try to set the bar high for all the other speakers. I want to thank all the members of the center who had a hand in bringing me here. Tak, I see you're here. Takigusa, thank you so much. Tom, I know you've had a hand in it. Anne, Rosemary, Aaron, everybody is, whoops, I think I got Rosemary and Aaron backward. Everybody's who's had a hand in this, so thank you. Without further ado, though, I think I'm going to get started on our topic for today. I had to make up the title for the talk long before I even sat down to write it, so it's not going to be a perfect alignment about current status and future directions, but I think you could see it that way. I think I really wanted to focus on methods, because they're so important to all of us. And I mean methods in terms of system science and all the issues that go with that. So let's start. First, I want to give you the goals for today. I would like you to be able, at the end of the talk, understand the motivation for my office, Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, our support of the Hopkins Center, but also of system science. Also, here's the meat of the talk, really, is all about these methodological challenges. And I think if you read the brief abstract, it was probably not even called an abstract, it was so brief, that was up on your website telling you why you should come to this talk in addition to the free lunch, I know you're all really here for the free lunch, but was that I would talk about Envision, which is part of NCORE, the National Collaborative on Childhood Obesity Research that Tom mentioned, and I will, but what I'm going to try to do is kind of go back and forth between what the issues are and how the network that we have called Envision is trying to address those different members. So I'm trying to kind of showcase some of the Envision work that's been going on. And I will also say that I believe you are going to be having at least one, if not more, members of Envision. I recommended several of them as speakers for your series, and I don't want to take their thunder away. So I will give you just brief previews so that it will entice you to come back and hear the full story from them. And then I also, of course, everybody always likes to know about funding opportunities, and Tom mentioned that I've been involved in creating those, and I have, and I'll tell you what those things are. So let's start about talking about what is our motivation. Why am I even here, and why do I have, I think, Tom, you said it so well, I have this consuming passion, and it's so accurate. I couldn't have said it better myself. I do. I have a consuming passion for system science, and I'd like to tell you why. So first, a little bit about our office. We are in the Office of the Director, as Tom mentioned, and our office has a annual budget of about $25 million, which is quite small, actually, compared to the other institutes and centers at NIH. But we don't hold a grant portfolio ourselves, so we have the ability to leverage this money. And so this is what we've been doing. We've been partnering with the institutes and centers to create these funding opportunities, to create other ways to make system science visible and encouraged, to provide training, et cetera. So I want to start, actually, Tom, with your work. And this is a work from Tom Glass, and I'm sorry I don't know McAtee's first name, but I've been quoting him or her and Tom for quite some time now, since this first came out in 2006. Now, I know this wasn't exactly the rendering of the diagram in the article that Tom and his colleague developed, but our previous director at OBSSR, David Abrams, was really the visionary for system science. He didn't know exactly what it was or what it could do, but he knew it was really important and that we should do it. And so when I arrived in 2005, he said, go find out what it is and make it happen. And this graphic here shows you what's going on. This is an oversimplification, of course. You can think of it as a model, right? It's a model of reality, but it's simplified. That's what a model is. It's a rendering of reality in a simplified fashion. And so this is showing you that we have levels all the way from the genomic level. In fact, at NIH, we actually have groups that work at the atomic level, okay, all the way up to the global level and everything in between. So we have the under the skin levels and the outside the skin levels. And also we have, it says lifespan on this graphic, but really it's meant to indicate time of all kinds. So it could be not just within a single lifespan, but across generations. And then on the other extreme, it could be all the way at whatever time it takes for cells to divide. And I'm sorry, I'm not a physiological, biological person, so I don't know what that is. But really, I'm here to tell you that the passion that I have is about the importance of method, because we all too often forget about what the method is and go running off to try to do something because either we need a publication or we're trying to get tenure or whatever the thing is for today, and we forget that we really should be looking at the method, because that's what tells you what questions you can even begin to ask. So what we really should be doing is starting with our research questions, and we have a very important, compelling one right here, global obesity. That's what this center at Hopkins is dealing with, but it applies far beyond obesity. And we need to figure out what methods we should be using to answer the questions that we have. So that's how I became hooked, because the complexity of the problem, as illustrated here, is far too complex for the methods that we have, because most of our methods go at one of these individual levels. Sometimes they do work across multiple levels, but they don't really capture all the complexities I'll talk about in a minute. So we also need additional methods beyond the traditional behavioral and social science research methods that our office had been used to seeing in all the grant applications to date, or at least most of them. So when you think about what methods, you got to be thinking about what your question is. And the methods, some of them that I'll talk about today, system science methods in particular, get at these issues of understanding complexity and also synthesizing the evidence. When you have such a huge pile of evidence, okay, all of the evidence is good. Which thing should you do? You don't have money to do everything. Okay, so how do we make priorities among our evidence? How do we make priorities among our research gaps when we know we need to do more research? How many meetings have you been at where the bottom line was, we need to do more research? Yeah, we do, but which things should you do? Because you don't have an infinite dollar to spend or infinite people, subjects to put in studies, et cetera, infinite time. And then action. We have Michelle Obama here with her Let's Move campaign, and she has, I think, a new program out. I can't remember what it's called, but it's under the Let's Move. I think it has to do with dancing. You know, is that what we should be spending our money on when we go to action? And so we have so many different things we could do. Which are the things we could do? And I'm not meaning any disrespect to Michelle Obama. I think it's a great program. We just need to evaluate it and do so in a way that takes into account the complexities and context of the problem that we're studying. So, bottom line, why is our office interested in system science? Because these methods that I'm going to talk about can address health problems that are complex. That's the importance, complex. Especially in context, we need to employ the complex methods that will match those problems. The behavioral and social science investigators, at least before 5 years ago, didn't really know about these methods. You all are kind of at the leading edge. There are still many universities where people aren't familiar with these methods. You all have a whole center, so you're lucky. We wanted to increase the training, and that's part of the mission. A big part of the mission of the Hopkins Center is getting training in the methods. And we want to aid investigators in getting grant funding so that they can use the appropriate methods to study the important questions, right? Okay, so just so we're all on the same page, system science is really a family of methodologies that enable the study of complex problems. As I said, any model is going to make your problem in a tractable form. So it's not going to be exactly like reality. If it was, then you would go and do it in reality, right? But it makes it in sort of a tractable form to help you understand better and work with your problem while retaining the salient characteristics. It addresses big picture problems as well as all the little things that make up that big picture. Modeling and simulation characterized much, if not most, of system science, but it's not exclusive, and I'll talk about a few things that aren't modeling and simulation. So these methods, what are these complexities that these methods can capture? Dynamic behavior, so this is the change over time. And we do, with our traditional methods, have ways to measure change over time, but unfortunately a lot of these have restrictions on the method so that they can only capture relationships that are linear over time. And what happens when you have the real world and these kind of relationships change in a way that might be either chaotic or in a way that is exponential or other forms of change over time? They also importantly capture bidirectional relationships where A affects B and B affects A. So a person may, since we're on the topic of obesity, stop exercising, and then the more they stop exercising, the more weight they gain. The more weight they gain, the less they feel like exercising. And it's one of those vicious cycles, you see. And that's the kind of thing that we need to be able to capture because they may be very important in some of the behavior we're studying. I mentioned nonlinear, like threshold behavior or worse before better. What happens if you have an intervention? Things actually might get worse, but then over time they'll get better. And if you just stop and look at them when they've gotten worse, you might abandon a perfectly good treatment. So a lot of prevention things fall in that category. If not worse before better, it takes a while to get better. These methods can help you understand and uncover unintended consequences, things that happen when you don't mean for them to happen, when you're trying to do one thing and you get another instead, because you're not looking at the whole system. You don't understand it. That's why. Emergent properties, things that you can't understand by just studying the elements of your system. You have to look at the whole system to get that kind of thing. These methods can help us look at our gaps in existing knowledge, and with sensitivity analysis, this is a method or a way to do things that helps you test kind of the limits. If I put in the best case scenario and the worst case scenario when I don't know, I don't have all the evidence, I might be able to see what range the answer falls in, and then I can kind of get a grip on if it's a small range, then maybe I have enough to go on. If it's a huge wide range and the output of the model changes drastically depending on what the real evidence is, then I might want to go after that evidence and try to collect that data. Okay, and these, importantly, methods enable virtual experimentation. So you can do experiments with your computer models in a very short amount of time that you can't do in the real world, because it might take 2 decades, for example, to see how policy turns out. I hope, and they can generate hypotheses for empirical testing. I hope most of what I said has just been a very brief, rapid review. Here's a slide you can come back to later that talks about the terminology. But let's go to the problem of obesity. It really is a complex one. You all had here in the spring when you had your symposium, Boyd Swinburne talking about the global drivers of obesity. So you all know that there's a whole host of things that go into driving obesity. So it's got all these different interrelated pieces, and we need to understand how those things work. So we, in addition to funding the Hopkins Center, which is a cooperative agreement from NICHD to establish the center here at Hopkins, along with the Hopkins money that funds the center. In addition, we, OBSSR, we fund a small amount of the center. But in addition to this Hopkins Center, we also have the National Collaborative on Childhood Obesity Research. So this is called NCORE for short. It's the funders getting together to make sure we invest our money wisely to address obesity. So this is the National Institutes of Health, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And within that, we have something called Envision, which is funded partly by NCORE. Also, the projects within it are research project grants, a lot of them, and contracts and cooperative agreements. So we have a whole mix in there. And some of them are funded by OBSSR, some by NICHD. I think actually NHLBI may be funding some, and Robert Wood Johnson at least has in the past. So Envision is a place for us to get our 11 teams together. And we also have friends of Envision, I don't know what to call them, or adjunct members, people who come to Envision. And I will talk about some of their work here, including, for example, Boyd Swinburne, even though he doesn't have an official grant from NIH right now to do this work. But these are agent-based models, social network analysis, microsimulation, system dynamic models, quantile regression, and hidden Markov models are all under those 11 teams. So some of them that I'm going to talk about today, I'm not going to talk about Eddie Ip's work, but you could look that up if you want. But he and Kiros Berhane, which OBSSR co-funds with NICHD, their work is kind of at this meso level. Hajir Ramandad, who's doing a system dynamics model, aggregates individual system dynamics models up to try to approximate national level data. And then Ross Hammond integrates everything from, well, I'm not sure he's down, he is at the genomic level. He's not at the atomic level, but he's at the genomic level all the way up to the global level. So what are these challenges I've been talking about in obesity? It's not really just for obesity. It's actually for a lot of health problems, but we're talking here today about obesity. But one of the problems I see, and I'm trying to outline for you the areas that we need to work on or at least pay attention to, if not develop new methods for, take advantage of the methods that we do have. So sub-individual, the physiology and biology, and integrating that with higher levels like individual, community, national, and global levels. So we really need, I think if I had to point out one area on this slide that we really need the most work is I haven't hardly seen any. In fact, I could say I haven't really seen any, except for Ross's work, that really combines that under the skin level of multiple levels underneath the skin and outside the skin. So people's behavior and also their genetics in looking at obesity. So that's one area that we really need to do more in. But all of these levels, we need to think about how we're going to integrate that data that comes at all those different levels of analysis. And a lot of these system science methods can do it, so I would encourage you within your scope of the center to go ahead and go for these things. So let's talk about Hajir Ramandad's work. He's at Virginia Tech. He's formally trained as a system dynamicist out of MIT. And his project goal has been to develop basically a policy simulator that can be used at the national level. So we know that if we put in a national level policy, what will happen to population prevalence of obesity over time. So he starts out with a core population model. This is actually from Kevin Hall, who I think also, I'm not sure if he came to your symposium or not, but he's an NIDDK researcher, National Institute on diabetes, digestive and kidney disorders as part of NIH, and he's an intramural researcher, so he's funded within NIH. He doesn't have to compete for grant funding the way you all do, at least not the same way. He does have to compete, but not quite the same way. He's funded internally as an NIH staff member. But anyway, so Hajir was able to leverage that individual model that Kevin Hall had created, a computational model, and Hajir leveraged it so he can look at an intervention, how that impacts calorie consumption and physical activity, and then how that's going to impact that person's weight over time. And then he aggregates all those people all the way up, looking at their specific demographic information and so on. So, and in context. So you can then try out a second intervention and then compare the impact that each of those interventions has alone or in combination to either, all the way around. And you can do that with as many interventions as you want. And what his model has is, at its base, is really a calorie calculator for energy intake and energy expenditure, so that you end up, I think it has energy expenditure at least. Yeah, physical activity. So he really has a nice model that no matter what intervention you're doing, you can always translate it back to calorie deficit. Okay. So I can let you read more about this. I think I've talked, kind of described what that is, and this is a graphic that shows you. And then what he does, very importantly, is the validation step right here. So he's taking NHANES population-level data, which was not used to develop the model, and he aggregates, if you think of this as a model for each individual, individual 1, individual 2, all the way up through individual N, and each of them has underneath this system dynamics model of their calorie or their energy deficit or energy surplus and weight gain over time. Then he aggregates it up to the population level. So he just creates the individuals based on what he knows about the age and other demographics, race, et cetera, of the population. I think I'm going to have to get some water or coffee. So this is a recent paper by Kevin Hall and Boyd Swinburne in Lancet Diabetes. I think it was just published in August. Or July. Oh, thanks. And this is Hajir's matching of moments. So he tries to match with his synthetic data to the real population. Just shows you more about his policy testing. His, if you look at the blue line, that's the historical data up to the point where you see the red line start to separate. And then at that point, he's got projected out with the model if nothing changed. And then he did a test on removing competitive foods from the environment to see what would happen. And if there were no competitive foods, the body weight over time would decrease. But it's still going to increase, but it's not going to increase as much as it would under the base case. And that's why we need to do the simulations, because you can't assume everything is going to stay static over time. It's going to change even if you don't do anything. And so what you really want to know is how much different it will be if you do something. Another person in our network is Ross Hammond. And I apologize. I have asthma that seems to always get aggravated when I give talks. And he's done a different method. So system dynamics modeling is done with aggregating. Now, Hajir used it to aggregate within a person, and then he did a separate individual system dynamics model for each person. Ross uses agent-based modeling, and he starts with individuals, and it's governed by rules on how those people will behave. They could be, agents could be people, as I just referred to, or they could be things in the environment, like a food establishment. They could be cells in the body. Agents can actually be anything. So this is referring to work that he published in 2012 in Frontiers in Computational Neuroscience. And this is one module. This is actually his first module of 5 that he's going to do. Remember, he's trying to integrate all the way from the genomic level all the way up to the global level. So he was trying to look at individual differences in reward learning. So this gets at a really important point methodologically. We really need to appreciate differences between people. And I think a lot of the traditional methods that we have are not so great at doing this. Agent-based modeling really strives when you have important differences between people, such as their ability to respond to reward and how well they learn that response. And in this case, they're matching reward learning and people's differences in that with their spatial distribution of food cues. So think about the food cues being the fast food outlets, the Whole Foods markets, the general aspects of the food environment. And that's spatially distributed. And that's another nice thing about agent-based modeling is you can let your agents run across physical space, a map of physical space, again, a model of space. So what he found was, the importance of this is finding if you have people who are going to learn differently, maybe those differences in how people learn interact with the environments they're exposed to. So it's not just where you live, it's where you've lived in the past when you were developing your reward learning and your exposure to those food cues. So I'm not going to go into this map. It's here for you to explore later. It's in his article, so you can read the article. But the bottom line from what he found in this first step in his work was a lock-in effect, so that early exposure may lock people in so that the way they learn their to be sensitive to high caloric food and their preference for it may stay with them long after they've left their original environment. Okay? So if you have kind of an inborn preference to it and you get exposed to it, you may not be able to get over it so easy as somebody who either doesn't have the genetic predisposition or the biological predisposition or isn't exposed to it. And also he found these key developmental windows. Now, of course, this work is really more hypothesis generation, but it shows that these things could happen based on what we know, which he took everything, was all evidence-based from the literature to feed into his models. So in early childhood, early exposure to unhealthy food may have a strong effect on long-term appetitive behavior. So he's actually looking more broadly. This is not in his paper, but he's now got work not only on the neurobiology of the food and the food environment. This is the spatial distribution. His data set is actually from a real place in Montreal. He actually has real data on all the food outlets, et cetera. I think I'll let you read his work to find out more. But he's actually trying to look at genes, neurobiology, the social environment, and he's got work going on now in the social environment and physiology and the built environment. So I think importance of measure I've tried to emphasize. I don't think I talked about this, but you see the guy on here who's in the street light? He's scratching his head. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a pair of keys. Now, I couldn't really get one to scale. You wouldn't have been able to see it if I did. But he can't find his keys. He's looking under the light. Now, we all know this, this joke about the guy looking under the light for his keys, and you ask him why he's looking there, because that's where the light's better. You ask him where did he lose them, it's over there in the dark. And I think that's what we do so often with our methods, and also for our measures. Why don't we ever stop to question, what should we be measuring in the first place? Is this the right measure? And we use it because everybody else used it. No, what you do, you measure BMI, okay, let's go. And also, this is really important, the frequency of when you measure. That's going to tell you so much. If you don't measure it, you won't see it. The timing of when in that process do you measure, not only how frequently do you measure, but when, and also the duration. How far out do you go? Do you stop after 2 weeks after your intervention, or 3 months, or 2 years, or 5 years, or 10 years, or what? And I think we need more of that foundational work that will direct us to tell us what those measures ought to be. The problem is it's not really sexy, exciting work, right? But it's what everything else is built on. So it really ought to be the sexy, exciting stuff, okay? It's important. So let me give you an illustration. I don't know how many of you saw this. This month's JAMA has an article on the prevalence and control of diabetes in Chinese adults. It's very alarming. 1 in 3 diabetics globally is in China. 11.6% prevalence versus 1% in 1980. This is 2013 versus 1980. Okay, they did say there's some changes in how it was measured, but even still, you wouldn't expect a hike of that much in the prevalence. Half Chinese have elevated glucose, and Chinese are developing diabetes at lower BMI than other populations. Well, that's something right there. at lower BMI than other populations. So maybe we shouldn't be measuring, if we're really interested in health outcome, right? We want to know how predisposed people are going to be to diabetes. Maybe for this particular population, we shouldn't be looking at least not only at BMI. What are the other drivers? Maybe it's adiposity and where it's deposited, or maybe it's percentage of body fat, or maybe it's some harder to measure thing. We shouldn't just go with BMI only because it's easy and we can do it and we have national survey data to do it. It's not the right reason, okay? So think about what you want to get out of it, so what you measure. Here's another example, neighborhood. Is a census tract really the same thing as a neighborhood? And I know there's people in here, Joel, that you work in neighborhoods, and other people in here. This may not be the right definition of neighborhood. So I refer you to this Chen, Florex, Snyder 2012 Health Economics paper for more on that. But this is just another example. Let's start to question what we're measuring, okay? Not just census tract because it's available. Maybe that's a good place to start, but just think about that. By the way, slides are available later. I'm sorry if you're not getting all the slides, but they'll be available to you later. Here's another article from one of the people in our network. This is Michael Rendell and Maggie Whedon. And they're looking at understanding the bias in self-report data on childhood measurements of height and weight, okay, as they relate to obesity. But really, he's doing this in service to his other work, which is really to try to do this data integration step, which is knitting together longitudinally people's trajectories of their growth and their predisposition to obesity, the BMI prevalence of obesity, I should say. So he's one of the guys that's doing that kind of unsexy work to try to figure out what is important about the measures that we're taking and how do they affect what we understand and interpret from our findings. This one is just to show you that there's a new report out. I'm sorry it didn't show up, but it's from the IOM, and I haven't read it yet, but it's evaluating obesity prevention efforts. And it talks about community-level measures, and I believe they have recommendations in there about what we should be measuring in communities. But I would invite you, hey, here's a wide-open opportunity. Go read it and then think about it. Hey, are those the right measures that we should be measuring? And I'm sure the committee thought long and hard about that, and perhaps some of you even in this room were on the committee. And but I would say let's at least think critically about everything when it comes to measurement. Here's some other work that's not in obesity from Nate Osgood, who's up at University of Saskatchewan. And he's not in our Envision network, but he's in another network that we have, which is the Network on Inequality, Complexity, and Health. So this is all on how to address health disparities with system science methods. And so he's taking on some real important measures. So in his case, it's looking at measures of contagion, and they have these sensors, so people carry cell phones, and so when you're in proximity to another person, it can capture that you're now near someone or you're near a data collection point. But as far as contacts for infectious disease to spread, how far away from that person do you have to be? 6 feet, 2 feet, 10 feet? In the same room, what does that measure? And if you don't know what that answer is, then you might just pick a handy measure of, oh, these people were within 6 feet of each other. But maybe you missed it because really you needed to be within 2 feet, or maybe you needed to shake hands. So we really need to understand measures. Another area we need to better understand and develop methods for is coevolution of networks. So David Shoham in our group, which is the bottom reference, has some work going on in this area. But looking at, say, for example, friendship networks may overlap but not be the same as people we eat dinner with or have our meals with for obesity. So we have to look at how our networks, whether it's friendships or publication networks or whatever, the coevolution of important networks. And the other example here is actually residential segregation. It doesn't have anything to do with obesity per se, but it's a nice recent example. I don't want to go into all of this about gene-environment interactions, but it really highlights the complexity of these problems. And I think that, like I said before, I think we really need to do more work on the under the skin and outside the skin levels. So just to give you one example that I can, if anybody contacts me, I can point you to his videocast. This was done in 2011. It's got a paper, but I also attended a workshop, which IOM workshop on the exposome. The exposome is the totality of exposures to toxic agents, infectious agents, heavy metals, anything you can think of, including the behavioral and social environment. So it includes physical activity and dietary intake. So what he studied, which really wasn't related to obesity per se, but was really looking at heart disease and the risk for heart disease. And what he was doing is a test of choline and how that would affect, exposure to choline would affect atherosclerotic buildup in the arteries. And what he found was that the presence of a microbe in the gut was really determined, because that microbe determined what enzymes would interact with the choline and break it down to certain metabolites. I know I'm not doing it justice. You have to read it. But it's an interaction between the genetics, the microbiome, the acute diet. What was really interesting is also the long-term diet. So he had people who were vegetarians, I think actually vegans, and they didn't have any meat in their diet, and those people did not show the interaction with the choline, the acute exposure to choline in the diet. But if you switch those people over to a 2-week long-term diet of meat, and then you expose them to the acute diet with choline in it, then they did have the same interactions with the microbiome in the diet. So it's very interesting how all this thing plays out. And for a real professional to describe it to you, I invite you to look at Stanley Hazen's work. Just an illustration of the complexity of our problems and how we have to deal with them. So here's another thing I was thinking we really need to do more of, which is get out of our silos. Even me in system science, I know I've been promoting these methods, and Tom, you did a wonderful tribute to my work, but even me, I have to get out of that box of just thinking about these methods. They're very valuable, but we need to think about how they can interact with other methods, and what other methods might even fall besides modeling and simulation under system science. And so I think these do. And this is Linda Collins at the Methodology Center. She's a PI. It's a P.H.D. grant from NIDA. And she's got these great interventions. So she's been applying them to individual interventions. So for individual people who are going to be intervened on. But they could as well be used for community intervention, et cetera. And what she does is she has these strategies of ways to set up your research design that you, first of all, to expose them to this engineering method so you can optimize what you're going to get out of your treatment intervention before you start. Because she talks about the RCT and the black box. You have multiple components in an intervention. You put it in an RCT. It works. Well, what worked? You had 5 components. Which of those components worked? And what do you know if your intervention could have been better? Maybe it could have been even better than that if you had optimized it. So anyway, that's a nice thing to read about at the Methodology Center. She's got other things that deal with this smart interventions and smart research designs where you change the treatment according to the response to treatment. Okay, so it's not the one size fits all for everybody. It's very interesting. We also need to do more with mobile health. We have all these cell phones now, the ubiquity of the smartphone, and we really need to leverage those platforms for data collection and for intervention. But we need to, I think, combine them with the system science methods. That could be a great way to have a tighter coupling between modeling and data. As data comes in, you can update your model. As your model goes along and then you get more data, you keep updating it. And if you have real-time data collection through smartphones, that could happen. So EMA is just a fancy term, ecological momentary assessment, for capturing data, and now we have it very feasible with the ubiquity of the cell phone, for capturing data real-time in the moment, in the context in which it's happening, as opposed to in a research lab. Okay, I think I'm only giving it one slide, but this needs a lot of work and further development. Community-based participatory group model building. When we go and we decide to intervene on communities, we can't just decide it because we're the researcher and we thought it up. We need to talk to the communities because that's where all the action is. That's where there's going to be acceptability of whether these policies are really going to be taken up. And there's probably very important information in the community that we don't even know about, that wasn't measured, that we can't go to the literature to find. So I want to point you to another member of Envision named Peter Hoffman. He's at WashU St. Louis, and he's really focused on these participatory methods, and he's trying to innovate on how to make these methods better. And he's doing studies of obesity in the West End of St. Louis, which is a predominantly African-American population with high levels of poverty. And he's done a lot of work getting to know the community. It's extremely important. This is his slide, but I'll let you read that later. I want to do hammer away a little bit more on methods, and they determine what you're going to be able to find. If you don't know this work, you really should. You're at the premier school in the whole country, probably the whole world of public health. So if you haven't read this, please go home tonight. Don't tell anybody you didn't read it, but you haven't read it yet, but go home tonight and read it. Okay, it's Froelich and Potvin from 2008. They talk about vulnerable populations. Now, I think their work is extremely important in making the point that we need more complex methods to address what's happening in our population interventions. But I don't think they knew at that time, and I don't know if they still know, that we need the methods to address it. So they brought up the problem, which I give them a lot of credit for, but they didn't really bring the solution yet, which that's not their fault. They just didn't do that much on it in this article. So what they show you is, if you look at the curve with the higher peak, that's the distribution of the population on whatever problem you're talking about before the intervention. And then if you're measuring means, okay, how many of us have measured means in our work? Yes, I measure means, I look at the mean, I do. Okay, everybody probably does. But then if you look at the mean afterward, oh, look, I got an effect. Hey, my problem, the mean went down significantly. Oh, great, I've made a big difference in my population. But look at the people all the way on the far right. Those are the people, the vulnerable people who have a concentration of risk in that population. They didn't move. You made the well people get better and you left the sick people behind. Oh, great, you moved the mean, So this is really important. You got to read this, the unintended consequences. So I'm going to skip these examples. You can go back and read them. But it's really getting at this idea of there's variability in responses to interventions. And we need to understand that vulnerability. It's so important. This is the American Society for Nutrition. Their top research needs, number one, variability in responses to diet and food. So please, if you're looking for a project, here's something to take on. Okay, and it gets at this very kind of issue. So here's somebody in our network, Kiros Berhani, who's at USC, the University of Southern California, who's doing work on quantile regression for mediation analysis. It is so important. If you do any work on mediation analysis, you have to entertain the possibility that the mediating variable doesn't have the same effect on everybody in your population. Just like I showed you for that vulnerable population, right? And moving the mean, it didn't help the people with the most risk. So here's a guy who's going out there to develop the methods that we need to understand this. Very important. Bayesian quantile mediation. He's got some papers on it. And the bottom line is, if you don't take into account these differences among people in your distribution, you may, in fact, miss the point, the whole point, just like Froelich and Potvin said. What's interesting about Kiros's work is that I don't know if this part is published yet. It may be in development to be published. But what he did show, he had a built environment intervention. He was able to randomize people to do two different communities who had features of their built environment were different. One basically more active oriented and one less so. And who do you think the intervention had the most effect on? By doing this mediation analysis, he did show that at different points on the distribution of BMI, it affected different people differently. You might have thought, as I would have, that you left behind the most important people, but in fact, it didn't. He actually showed that the people who had 85 percentile or greater of the BMI on the distribution are actually the ones who got help the most. So it can surprise you, and that's the point. You really need to go and use this kind of method to look and see what's going on. I'm trying to open your eyes. Here are the tools that exist and more that are needed. Okay, I'll let you look at this for further information on longitudinal data, because that's another complicating factor, right? I talked about frequency of measurement. It's not just the measurement, it's the analysis, and this really gets complex when you're collecting data over time and you're looking at trajectories, okay? But he's trying to tackle that problem. I don't want to get to this because I know I have to get to the rest of my slides. I'll leave them there for your perusal. I want to now talk about the funding announcements and resources that we have available through OBSSR. If you have any work you want to do on any of these kind of methods that go outside the bounds of the business as usual statistical approaches, which there's nothing wrong with, by the way, all the system science methods and others that I've mentioned here are complementary too. But we have this one. It's PAR 11314 and 315, so it's the R01 and the R21. R01 is our bread and butter research project grant. R21 is smaller, it's exploratory developmental grants. I can let you read all of this, but it is still open. We have two more in this. It's a PAR, so it's going to have 3 receipt dates a year for 3 years. There's 2 receipt dates left, but we do plan to reissue it. And even if we don't, we're going to publish something out there, this is my vow to you, that will encapsulate this, okay? It will be at least this and maybe more, okay? You have to know that NIDA is not participating, so you'll have to talk to NIDA about what they have. I know NIDA is excited about the system science methods, they just chose not to participate in this particular announcement, and there are a lot of reasons for that. NCI only does the R01, they don't do the R21. You should go to the announcement, but you can also contact me. I'm one of the contacts, we're the lead office that issued this announcement, OBSSR, and I'm the lead contact on this. So if you have any questions, you can certainly contact me, especially if you're wondering if your method would qualify as system science, and also want to know where, to which of the institutes and centers your project should be assigned. By the way, I don't have it in the talk, but if any of you are interested, I do have a resource page for grant applicants. If any of you are thinking about NIH funding, you should definitely get a hold of that resource page. You can get it by emailing me. We also now have a short courses on innovative methodologies in the behavioral and social sciences, and this is meant for training. We want to train people in all these different innovative methods that I mentioned and more. Okay, plenty of things that I didn't talk about that we need. So if you're interested in that, that's an RFA, so it only has a single receipt date. OBSSR put 100% of the funding for this one aside. I think we put aside 1.7 million, I'm going to say. So it's all the funding is coming out of our office, but we still have to partner with the ICs because they're the ones who have to administer the grants. But this is coming up. It's November 14th. Letter of intent due October 14th. I know that's quick, but you should never worry if you don't get your letter of intent in. You can always apply. Those are not mandatory. Okay, they're to help us, and it's more about that on the resource page that I mentioned. Okay, if you do want to go for this one, be sure to read the facts. There's something in the announcement called related notices. You should definitely look at that. We have this one, it's out of NIBIB, but OBSSR participates, and if you're interested in this question of where biology and the under the skin and outside the skin meet and how to mesh those level together and trying to address that, we're very interested in that. I just can't get anybody to come in and do it and get a good review. Mostly people aren't coming in. Big data, we got this whole big data movement. I put in this definition so you can come back and read about it. But NIH has a $40 million effort. I think it's going to be, upped every year so that there'll be at least, 20 million or so per year devoted to this. Don't quote me on the 40 million. I think the details are at BD2K, this website, Big Data to Knowledge. We have, at least right now, one funding announcement that's open. It's a centers grant. And this can get at some of those issues of knitting together data sets, or you have data from one source and another source, but you want to triangulate to try to figure out what's going on. We are participating. If you have ideas there will be more BD2K projects to come. Mobile health, I mentioned about using smartphones and other ways of technologies for collecting data. Here are 2 people you can contact about that. Another huge area that I don't have time to go into is the validation and guidelines for what to do with models. How do you build them? What is the protocol for building and sharing and reporting on your models and validating them? We should all at least have some sense of what those guidelines are so that when you read a paper, you can know what's there and there's transparency. Right now it's kind of a hodgepodge, but there are some people who've done some work. We have the GRIM ODD protocol for agent-based models. Hajir Ramandad, who I mentioned is in our Envision network, has got some reporting guidelines written. And then this medical decision-making had a whole special issue last year. So if you don't know about those, you need to. I'm going to have to wrap it up, but let me just say we have a AJPH special issue out just now on society, genetics, and health, all about gene, behavior, interaction. That's this month. We're going to have one next July, application of system science methodologies to address policy-relevant obesity research questions. We've already had the call. The papers are under review. We're publishing next month system science applications in health promotion and public health. That's myself and Bobby Milstein. That'll be coming out next month. This is the Network on Inequalities, Complexity, and Health that I mentioned. The most important thing here is at the bottom, February 24, 25, there will be a conference. So if you're interested in that, it's going to be at NATCH or at NIH. So you should stay tuned to my listserv to find out about all these kind of things. See, that's what I do. I put all this stuff out for you. I'm old-fashioned. I do a listserv. I don't do Facebook. I don't do Twitter. My office does, but I'm sticking to my listserv. It's worked for me this long. I got over 1,000 subscribers, right? So if anybody wants to get on that, just contact me. And if you do, you'll get free with your subscription, not only the resource page, but I can throw in the ginseng knives. No, I'm just kidding. I can throw in I'm seeing if you're awake, the 2007 symposium series on system science and health. Of course, you can always get that separately, but it comes with your subscription. Okay, it's a video cast series. I'm done. See if we have any time for questions. Oh, hello, people in the web world. I forgot we were video casting this. I was talking to my large live audience. Thank you, everyone who came out. For those of you who couldn't or didn't, you can email now to jhgcco@jhsph.edu, and I will get your question and I will field it for you. How about some in the room? Boy, I shocked you all into submission. Good. Well, we can start with you, and then we'll come here.
Okay, because mine's not related to obesity. I'm not myself an obesity researcher, but I have a great interest in systems theory as applied, or systems methods applied to other issues. Are there any other initiatives that are system theory oriented, but are not related specifically to obesity?
I mentioned the niche one. Right. I'm trying to get something going in tobacco, and I had a meeting already on tobacco modeling, but I haven't gotten it fully. I haven't been able to have time to return to it, but I need to light a fire under that and provide more opportunities. But this goes across all diseases, and you don't have to have a special initiative to apply to that system science PAR that I mentioned, PAR 11, 314, and 315. And that's also, not only does it cover any disease that NIH might cover, but it also covers basic and applied research. So it can cover the methodological development. That fits under there. That's part of basic discovery, but also basic methodological development.
Atif, did you have one?
Yeah, just as students, because most of the modeling techniques are something that were not ingrained coming in. So for most students, it's scary. And I think what happens is students tend to identify with some of the methods and techniques, but don't really understand the systems science thinking methodology. So how do you kind of build that, where you kind of understand how to start thinking in a complex adaptive system manner, and then kind of identify what methods fit the questions that you're trying to ask? Because there's different questions that you're asking with systems thinking
Okay.
in place versus traditional epidemiology.
I have an answer for you. So first of all, it's always hard, especially if you have been trained in specific methodology already, because then you're kind of, not on purpose, but you're kind of closed-minded. And I don't mean that like in a derogatory way. I was very closed-minded. It was just that my thinking was kind of rigid. It was everything I was trying to fit what I would learn new was built on a framework that was old and didn't work. And so, for example, I'd be constantly saying, well, wait a minute, you can't do that. That violates the normality assumption, or, you can't do that. But you have to completely change your thinking and say, oh, wait a minute. In modeling, a lot of times you have assumptions. You just state what they are. You're not hiding anything, but it's not decided what your assumptions will be. So I think part of it is just, I'd say, sticking to it, but I can give you some references, and maybe I'll put that in. And I don't usually send my slides, my final ones, in advance because I like to update them afterward based on questions like that. So one of the great references, there's two I would say. Learning from Evidence in a Complex World. It's John Sturman, 2006, AJPH, and I can put that in the slides for you. And the other one is Donella Meadows, I think it's 2008, Thinking in Systems. It's a wonderful little paperback book. It's thin. It's really easy to understand. I don't think there's any equations in the whole book. The most important thing for me, if you read that book, is the 12 ways to intervene in a system, and she talks about the things that we do, the low-hanging fruit, right? Don't we all want to go for that low-hanging fruit? It's right there. You just want to pick it. It's so easy. And that's what you hear all the time. Oh, let's go for the low-hanging fruit. That's where we're going to get our mileage out of that. But she shows you that that's really the biggest waste of time, because usually you're going to make such little difference that it's not going to matter, and you're spending your time on the wrong thing. You really need to do the hard stuff, which is go in and change the rules of the system or change who governs the system, the people with the power. Those are like incredibly impossible to do. Think about Congress. And, they have their hands on the power, and it's really hard to make those changes because you can't always change who has the power, right? But there's lots of things in between that we can do. So those are some things I'd suggest. The other last thing I'd say is, out of our office, I didn't mention this, but one of our priorities going forward that our new director, he's been there 2 years, but 2.5, Bob Kaplan has talked about is how can we get the methodologies away. I mean, we do need to do these short courses, no question. We do need to do the trainings that we've done out of our office that I didn't really mention today. But in addition, we need to go back to graduate school and change the curriculum. That's not going to be easy. And we do need so that students will be trained in these methods during school. They don't have to go out to special places to find them. And it's going to be hard because there's an old guard, there's a legacy, there's the way things have always been done. There's all kind of things tied up in that. But that's something we're going to try to crack.
I have a related question for you, Patty. And before I give it, great talk. That was a terrific overview and a lot of interesting things to think about. One of the things that we think about as investigators is that we see these RFA and funding opportunities posted, but the fear is that you'll write an elegant and beautiful application of system science. It'll get into the traditional mix of review on either study sections or even special emphasis panels, and they'll be asking the traditional kinds of questions. Where are the p-values? And how do you know if the model's right? And the kinds of things that are really at odds with the fundamental ideas. Do you have any hints or suggestions about how to think about crafting a grant application in the context of the old guard that exists in study sections and that is resistant to some of this?
Right. Well, the old guard is you, and if it isn't, it should be, those study sections should be you. And I know that not everybody in here thinks they could qualify to get on a study section. You don't have to have an RO1 to get on a special emphasis panel, for example. So volunteer, and if you email me and say I want to get on a study section, I will forward your CV to the Center for Scientific Review, and the Center for Scientific Review keeps a whole data bank of those, and then when they need certain expertise, they can go searching for it and find you. So I would say, by all means, volunteer, not only because you want to help others get their grants through that are system science focused, but also because it really helps you as a grantsman or grantswoman. It really does. There's nothing better than seeing other people and how they critique a grant to strengthen your own. So that's how you can strengthen your own. The other thing is we do have, for the RFAs, there's a special emphasis panel, and for the PAR, R stands for special review, and we deliberately do that for that very reason that you're talking about. We do understand that there is an old guard there on the standing study sections. And a lot of them, it's not their fault. They never got training in it. They haven't gotten exposure. They don't understand it. It's not familiar. And so for the special emphasis panel, especially for the system science ones that say this is specifically on system science or on modeling and simulation, you can better believe it's going to be loaded, chocked with system science people, because every application that is on there is a system science application. And the way that CSR, the Center for Scientific Review, and the SRO, the Scientific Review Officer, picks that panel to review, it takes all the applications that come in. Now remember, they're all going to be, to get in, you have to have system science methods. You can take all of them and look and see what they have. Oh, this one has agent-based modeling. Oh, this one has system dynamics modeling. Oh, this one has network analysis. Oh, this one has microsimulation. So pretty soon now your roster is stacked with those people. And even if your microsimulation person has never built a system dynamics model, they certainly appreciate the thought processes and they understand modeling. So I think that the special emphasis panels are a little stronger than you might think for your application. So.
An internet question, yeah.
Here's a question from Jeff Doherty. Hi, I'm curious about the discussion on population interventions and the idea that mean shifting leaves vulnerable populations behind. Can you talk a bit more about how the systems approach addresses this problem?
Well, the systems approach can do that by looking at the individuals. And so, for example, in agent-based modeling, you can program your individuals to respond differentially per person or per type of person to that intervention. You could do that with a system dynamics model just by creating a separate compartment, if you will, and model each of those groups based on whatever the relevant characteristics are. So there are ways to take that into consideration that isn't if you just use a mean-based method that looks at the mean, because the system science approaches don't necessarily look just at the mean. I hope that answers his question. I know we had a question here and a question here, so let's take this one first, 2, 3, if we have time.
Just two quick questions. One quick question about this whole idea of measurement and how you measure the right thing. I was really struck by that because I think that's one of the biggest issues for me. How do you define a metric? And so when you take the example of a calorie, you talk about how many calories do you burn as a measure of how much weight you lose, but then there are good calories, there are bad calories, and so I don't know if there's any work being done on how you sort of like index the idea of a calorie in terms of its nutritional value as well as its energy value, and how that affects the whole idea of obesity, and also the idea of BMI, the body mass index. Is there any effort to change that paradigm? Because I mean, there've been a lot of papers back and forth about whether BMI is an accurate reflection of what obesity is, and if there's any push to actually change the idea of how we measure these things.
So for BMI specifically, let me answer that part first. I don't know. The answer is I don't know if there's any efforts. But let me just say this: BMI. I'm not here to disrespect BMI. Okay. So we have measures for a variety of reasons. But what I'm here to advocate is we need to understand them and understand when it isn't good enough. If you're looking at a population and that's your easy thing that you can get, maybe that's all you can do with your method. But you need to understand the limitations and how that restricts what the answers are to what questions you can. The answers you can get to your questions. So in many cases, maybe BMI is great and it works perfectly for the research question you have. As to your different types of calories and, good calories, bad calories, I mean, I don't know, and I'm not an expert in that particular literature, but I would say as a good starting point, if you haven't read it already, would be Kevin Hall, because he's the one who took away the myth that a pound is 3,500 calories all the world around, and he's showing that it isn't. And so that sounds to me like you're on the right track, and those are perfectly great research questions. Go dig around in the research literature. Go talk to people. Go call up Kevin Hall, read his literature, and talk to him. And then maybe somehow you'll find out some answers to these questions so that in 10 years when I'm standing up here, or maybe you're standing up here, you'll have you'll be closer.
Time for one more quick question.
Are you sure? Okay, Yufa.
Patty, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. It's a special pleasure to have you here after such a long journey. My question, actually, I have two questions. I hope that's okay, Tom. The first question is regarding validity. As a PI who have been applying for 2 grants at the U24 Foundation Center, I have a lot of interest about system science. But there is one big question I have been thinking, still do not know the answer, but I want to hear from you. How should we get the answer? Validity of system science.
Yeah.
There are, especially in the biomedical field, very evidence-based field. A lot of people consider system science is modeling, is a computer based. How do you convince people?
Yeah. So I think one first answer is that we need a lot of work on that area. It's wide open. That's one that I'm committed to as long as I'm at NIH, and I've been trying for probably a while now to get together a workshop on this topic, and we have a lot of problems with contractual issues. Let me just say that. I wouldn't say problems, but maybe just obstacles. So it's not me not wanting to do it. It's putting in the time and effort to do all the administrative contractual stuff to get us there. But at any rate, one thing I can say is that we're not ever going to get a litmus test, yes, no. Is this model valid? Yes, no. We're not going to have a p equals 0.05. Oh, if it's 0.05 or less, it's valid. If it's 0.051 or over, no, it isn't valid. There's not going to be something like that. It's the same kind of flexibility you need in your mind to realize what it's going to be more shades of gray. It's going to be more like this model was valid for this population at this time point under these circumstances making these assumptions. And here's how we tested it. And here's it's valid on this test. Okay? So it's not going to be, we just have to find the validity test. It's not going to be like that, I'm sorry to say. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. It's a wide open area and it's extremely important. And one of the problems is in trying to sell it to people who aren't familiar with it, it's a really hard sell to say, we don't have a litmus test. There is no yes or no validity. It's a hard sell.
Thank you very much. Please refer to additional questions later, and thank you so much for coming and for a very spirited discussion, and thank you for those online, and please join me in thanking.
Thank you. Pleasure was mine.